One. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Ray Tampa podcast. Our podcast offers bold commentary on various subject matters with a laser-like focus on the truth. My name is Ray Tampa, and I'm the host of the Ray Tampa podcast. We have in our studio Mr. Russell Cato, a retired educator with more than 40 years of experience here in Pinellas County. And Mr. Jamie Wilson III, a healthcare provider with more than 25 years of experience as a physical therapist, my dynamic co-host. We're excited to have as our guest today, Miss KHENDRA Rowley, who has some very interesting information about her journey to motherhood.
Interesting. Yeah.
KHENDRA,
Sure.
welcome to the Ray Tampa podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, by all means, glad to have you.
Glad to have you.
KHENDRA, please share with our audience a little information about yourself, such as where were you born, raised, and educated?
Okay, well, that's a really easy question. I was born and raised right here in St. Pete, Florida. I graduated from Lakewood High School. I then went to FAMU and then transferred to USF and graduated from USF in Tampa.
Okay, awesome. Okay.
Homegrown.
Homegrown, I like that. Thanks for the information.
Certainly, sir.
On May 22nd, 2024, the Tampa Bay Times published an article titled, quote, "Procreation Vacation. Why the global IVF market is booming," end of quote. The writer, Christopher O'Donnell, featured our guest prominently throughout the article. In vitro fertilization, IVF, is an important and expensive option for women to utilize in their efforts to increase the size of their families. The article examines the cost, accessibility, and the rewards of IVF for women and families wanting a child. Miss Riley experienced it all, and she's here to share with us those experiences that led to her delivering a beautiful baby girl.
Yeah.
Yay, you're right. Yay.
Yeah.
Miss Riley, when did you first realize that an alternative method for pregnancy would be necessary?
That's also a good question. So it was sort of early on when I was probably somewhere in my early 30s. I just found out from a fertility doctor because I was trying back then and we weren't successful at the time. So I was like, something's wrong. I don't know what's this should be easy, right? Like we know how to get a baby. We know how the babies get here. So I talked to my OBGYN and they referred me to a fertility specialist, a reproductive endocrinologist. And I found out when I was about 31 years old that I could have babies the good old fashioned way, but it would just be really, really difficult. And I would have to like be 1 in 100 or something like, so it wasn't impossible, but it would probably just be a little bit easier if I just went ahead and did the IVF.
Okay. All right. So the chances of having one naturally
they were just really
were
high.
diminished.
Yeah,
Those
they were
chances were diminished.
Yeah, the chances were low. Sorry.
Okay. What options were there for consideration, and what caused you to settle on IVF? What other options were there, and what caused you to settle on IVF?
When you're diagnosed with unexplained infertility, which is what I was diagnosed with at that time, they couldn't explain why. I was young enough to be able to have a child, but so they just didn't have a good reason. So the diagnosis which is a really broad diagnosis that a lot of women receive.
Mhm.
They just basically are like, well, we don't know why, but we know you can't as easily as someone else. Really, at that point, the only option is fertility treatment or, come to terms with the fact that you may not have a baby the good old fashioned way. So that really was the only option.
Were there any concerns about your male partner in terms of his sperm count and things of that nature?
So it wasn't necessarily a concern, but when you go to a reproductive endocrinologist, they always test your partner as well. And he, did not have any issues with, his virility or, fertility. It
Right.
was definitely me.
Okay,
Hmm.
all right. Um, due to the exorbitant costs for IVF treatments here in the United States,
They are
you
absorbent.
began investigating costs in other countries.
That's correct.
How about naming some of the other locations you considered?
Well, I considered even moving out of state one time because right now, there are about 16 states, I think, which that increased because there were only about 7 or 8 at the time that basically they're required to cover fertility treatments with their health insurance.
Right.
So I was like, oh, well, then I'll just move to, Minnesota or New York or one of the states that covers it with health insurance, and then I'll be able to afford it.
Right.
Which obviously I didn't do that. I didn't want to leave my home base, I have roots here in St. Pete, so I wound up not doing that. So I don't know. One day I was just scrolling through Facebook
Mhm.
and one of my friends had just had a baby and it mentioned Barbados Fertility Center. And I was like, Barbados Fertility Center? Why would she have to go to a fertility center? Like what? So I sent her a message and I was like, hey, tell me all about this Barbados Fertility Center and tell me why you had to go. And she just explained to me, her situation and that she went there and she was like, they're awesome. If you ever need fertility treatments, that's where you should go.
Okay.
So I kind of just banked that in the back of my mind because at the time, I was like, man, I'm not going to go to Barbados. I'm never going to be able to afford this. Like, that's where I was at because, after talking to my RE and just finding out the costs, I was like, oh gosh, nobody's got like $25,000-$30,000 just laying around to
Mhm.
have a baby. Like, you know what I mean? And so that began the journey. I actually sent a message to Barbados Fertility Center months later after that, after I talked to my friend. It was just maybe even a year or more later. And the rest is history at this point.
Okay, she made a point that I want to revisit because she indicated that there are some states that allow their insurance companies to cover fertility treatment.
It's
And
mandatory.
it's a small number,
Mhm.
small number. I think I read there might be 16 states that allow for insurance to cover it, Florida not being one,
Right.
naturally, especially with well, I don't want to get into the politics, but nevertheless, that was an option you considered, just going to another state and you decided you didn't
And
want to
get a job somewhere else
and get a job.
and start over.
Right,
And
right,
yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Okay. I want you to, if you don't mind, before I move on,
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
So is there something, was it a genetic thing, like in your family, anybody else in your family, any females have any difficulties with
There were no other.
relatives?
My mom had 3 children. I'm one of 3. My grandmother had 9 children. My great grandmother had my grandmother. As my aunts had children, like at the time it literally was just unexplained. But I have a theory, which it's not substantiated by anything that I know of. It's just my theory. I just think that I think that we're exposed to a lot of toxins
Food.
in the foods that we have.
Yeah.
Like I think food is
Right.
different than it was a long time ago when my mom ate food and my grandma was eating food. I think they put a lot of stuff in the food these days. And I know that they, you know, a lot of young women were encouraged, like when we were in college, to be on birth control and take control of your fertility and don't worry about having babies, just worry about your career. I think that also has something to do with it. So again, I don't know the facts. I'm not a scientist. I don't know, but that's my theory. And I think a lot of women, because the number just keeps rising. It used to be 1 in 8 women that suffered from, you know, fertility issues. Now it's 1 in 5,
Hear about it a lot.
you know, so never anything genetic, never anything that I knew of in my family history. Cause I dug deep into my family history to see like maybe, I just think that the things we're exposed to nowadays, I think it's messing a lot of people.
It's enough food, the hormone.
Yeah.
That is
Mhm.
a great subject for another podcast.
Mhm.
Yes.
Because when you're talking about food intake and how they're producing food, that's a serious discussion.
It is.
GMO.
Mhm.
Not only
Yeah.
infertility as a concern, cancer is a
Mhm.
concern.
Yes. Mhm.
Diabetes is a concern.
Mhm.
Everything is a
Yeah.
concern
Yeah,
based on food intake and the processing of food.
agreed. Mhm.
Thank you for that response.
Certainly.
I want to ask you to explain to our listeners in as much detail as possible
Okay.
the process of IVF or just what's involved.
Okay. In as much detail as possible. So when you have IVF, basically what happens is they take a sperm and they take an egg, they put them together in a petri dish and they create an embryo. An embryo grows and then they take that said embryo and they implant it into a woman's uterus. And by the grace of God and blessings on blessings, that embryo will implant into the uterus lining and the woman will be pregnant.
Okay.
That's the long story short. That's, you know, there's lots of other avenues. Some people, you know, have to have something called ICSI, which is basically assisted hatching, where they have to like help the sperm get into the egg. There's like different like levels, but that's the basic,
The basics.
that's basically how IVF works.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Now, there's something called an IVF cycle. And on the average, I'm understanding that it takes 2.5 cycles for a woman to actually become pregnant. Explain what an IVF cycle is for our audience.
So an IVF cycle is essentially what I just explained, but in order to do the complete cycle, you have to take a lot of medications, like because you basically have to
Yeah.
control the whole entire thing. So you take progesterone and you take estrogen and you take other meds that like basically make your ovaries create a whole bunch of eggs.
Right.
So that they can then take the eggs out. They have to like they have to extract the eggs so that they can put the eggs with the sperm.
Sure.
Everything is done outside of your body, but meanwhile, you're preparing your body to get ready. You're
Correct.
preparing your body, you're preparing your uterine lining to get thick so that it can receive an embryo. You're just putting everything in like the perfect environment so that you can actually get pregnant by IVF.
That's the question I want to ask.
Mhm.
Russ,
It's amazing she's going through all of this thing.
It's a lot.
But in actuality, you actually become the carrier.
Yes, well, I
Yeah.
am the carrier.
Yeah.
I am the mom. I was
Yeah.
definitely pregnant for
Yeah.
9 whole months.
Yeah.
Like
But they
40 weeks.
prepare you. Go
Yes,
on.
yes, you get prepared and like nobody
Okay,
understand, like they do.
okay.
So for me, in my case, I had to take all kinds of medicine. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. And I took a lot of vitamins and stuff because I feel like being naturally healthy
Right,
also. And I was always a good candidate because I was always like, I always ate relatively healthy. I always worked out. I always did the things to be healthy in general. But I remember having like some of the medications that they make you take, like raise your blood sugar. So I remember I was even taking metformin. I was like don't like people with diabetes take this.
Mhm.
I was taking metformin. I was taking like injections of some medicine. I can't even remember the name of it. I think it's for like blood clots or something, but I had to take a shot in my stomach every day at like 3 o'clock. And then I had to do a shot, in my rear end at 6 o'clock every day. I had to take a handful of pills and potions. I mean, you just put your body through
Yeah.
so much. And like, honestly, for me, I just was like, if the stars would have just aligned properly, I wouldn't have to go through all of it's just so much.
That's an
Um,
interesting point. I
That is
didn't
something else.
consider
So much
all the
goes into getting
medications,
pregnant.
Yeah,
all
that's
the
why I asked her.
medications.
And they're super expensive too.
Yeah,
Oh.
and I was reading where in one country, the actual process was relatively inexpensive, especially when compared to the process here in
Mm-hmm.
our country.
Mm-hmm.
But the medications were in the neighborhood of $3,500 to $4,000.
Yep, like $4,000. Yep. That's correct.
So,
And you have to take the meds. You
Yeah.
can't
Can't go-
say, hey, I'll just skip the meds. You can't. You can't.
and a lot of people might not consider the fact that there's an emotional toll on the woman as well as the family.
Yeah. It's a huge emotional toll because they always tell you when you do IVF, it's not a guarantee, it's just a chance. So you go through all of this
Yes.
and, I have an Instagram that's dedicated to IVF and infertility and all of that. And I follow a bunch of other IVF warriors. That's what I call them.
Right.
And I've seen families and I've seen husbands and wives, I've seen single moms. They've done it like 4 or 5 times and just the letdown sometimes. It's just you pump yourself up and you're hoping and hoping and hoping, and then it's just another no. You know what I mean? And that's a lot. It gives you anxiety for sure. It's a lot. It is a
Yes.
lot.
I have a
Jake?
question. So once they implant, they fertilize it and plant the egg back in you,
Mhm.
what are the like safety precautions? Like, are you on bed rest? Like no rough walking or no whatever, no sex, no,
That's actually a really good question. And I think it varies from doctor to doctor. But where I went, they were like, no, go exercise, go have a walk, do whatever you have to, like, do normal things. Like, don't go lifting, weights. But if you want to go and walk and
Okay.
do the regular things that you normally do, go do them. That's what they told me. Mhm.
You ever notice the title and say
Hey, Russ.
procreation vacation?
Russ.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. What is it called?
Procreation.
Procreation vacation.
Vacation.
Is that what you had?
Technically, but not really. So my story is a little bit different in the
Okay.
sense that, so after me and my ex broke up, my ex-fiance and we broke up, I knew that I still wanted to be a mother,
Right.
Right.
but I didn't have any suitor, obviously. So I went a little bit off the beaten path and I went through a sperm bank and I purchased sperm that I would
Right.
then use to do my IVF with.
Okay.
So technically it was a procreation vacation, but not really though. I just really, it was the doctor that got me knocked up. Like,
All right.
and that's cool. It's definitely a different path. It's
Right.
definitely a different route. But I know 2 things.
KHENDRA.
I know 2 things that I want to have a family.
Right.
My fertility was shaky at best, but I also knew that, I'm definitely going to be, married and have a family.
Right.
It's just not in the same order.
Right.
You know,
Do it how you do it.
I had to do it how I had to do it because I don't know what would have happened
Mhm.
if I would have gotten any older,
You made a point that I didn't
Oh,
think
my
about, and I want to ask you now,
Mhm.
because you said you went to a sperm bank and purchased the sperms.
Yes.
Okay, do they have information about the sperms that you're purchasing?
They have all of the information you could possibly need. They get down to the DNA, like what people are genetically predisposed to have. I mean, I got to see the education level photographs of them as an adult and as a child, and just a
This
very
is interesting.
comprehensive overview of this person, who donated their, really, I don't know if they donated, because I didn't,
Yeah.
it wasn't
Yeah.
donated to me. I paid my money for it, but but yes, it's a very comprehensive overview. So I got to select, and it's a really big thing in the United States right now. And a very famous person, the Brat, she and her partner actually went through IVF, and it's a whole big thing because there aren't a lot of Black men who donate sperm. So when a Black woman needs fertility treatments and they need sperm, the pickings are very slim. Like, I was very lucky to get, an African person, well, Afro-Latino person,
Correct.
because there were probably no other Black choices. Like, I was so lucky to get somebody that I felt like if I met him on the street, we probably would date and get married. Like, he's
Yeah,
the type of guy that I would be attracted to.
right.
And I was lucky because a lot of other people wind up not being able to do it, or winding up with like a donor that's not their race. And I know it's important, like when you have a baby, you want your baby to look like you.
Yeah.
Right.
While it sounds kind of shallow, it's not shallow. It's serious. Yeah.
So
That's
that was an
interesting.
excellent point you made about going to a sperm bank and making a purchase, because I didn't even think about that point.
Mhm.
And
And I
look at all
mean,
that she just said about
That's,
that particular point.
yeah, think about sickle cell. That's important.
Oh
As
my
re-
God.
residents.
Okay, so and the fact that you said there aren't that many African American males donating sperm.
it's very hard to find
Oh.
an African American male. And if you do find one, in the quote words of the Brat, they are ugly. I'm just quoting her.
That's what
Oh,
she
my.
said.
I'm just quoting the Brat, but I'm just saying, you don't want you want your kid to be cute too,
Boy,
And looking
Kendra,
at
that's
the
something
picture of
else.
your baby, looking at the picture of your baby as you're holding in that photograph
Yes,
in the
she
Tampa
is
Bay Times,
cute.
obviously you made a good choice.
And it was hard. It was hard. I went through lots and lots and lots of donors. I mean,
My God, this is
man, that's
valuable information for a lot of women.
I'm very glad to be able to share
Very
it, because I
valuable.
think that I had to go and look for all of this information, and
Yeah.
it took a lot. And I just want to be able to help somebody else who may be like me, not even just, the woman who's married and her husband are having fertility issues, but the woman who's single, who wants to be married, but it just didn't line up that way just yet,
Besides all the things that she has said to us, there are a lot of other things to consider, because you need to consider the age of your eggs.
Mhm.
That's a big,
Consider
that's,
the age of the eggs. And people need to understand that pregnancy rates are not the same as live birth rates.
that is correct. That is
Yeah,
correct. And
you
there's
might
a
have
lot of talk
lot of
about that.
pregnancies, but live births don't match up, don't align
Yeah.
for other
Yeah.
reasons.
Mhm. That's
would
the
you
reason why
tell
there's
us,
such
Leonardo?
there's a lot of big talk in Congress, and they're passing a lot of laws. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that. And they're trying to control embryos and the fertility
Yeah.
process. And I have lots and lots of feelings. That would probably be another show.
Mhm.
But I think some people don't understand that.
Population control.
Wow,
That's a theory.
Mhm.
And that's another show too.
my God, on this particular podcast, we've talked about so many subjects,
This is beautiful.
so many subjects.
Yeah.
And when her dad texted me
Okay.
to suggest her coming on to this podcast, I was unfamiliar with IVF at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing my research, as we always do, our research. And I'm somewhat familiar, and she just plugged in all the holes. And
I'm glad to be able to do
you
that.
have done a great job. I want to ask you this. Well, actually not ask you, but a very high percentage of the people that have gone to that clinic in Barbados, a very high percentage are from the United States.
Yes.
Now,
Money,
you
money,
mentioned
money.
earlier that it's a quality facility and they do a quality program. So I guess that explains it. On
Yeah.
top of the fact that it's much cheaper than what
Yeah.
is offered here in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any idea of another facility anywhere in the world that has a quality program such as in Barbados?
I'm sure there are lots of other quality programs. And I know that Barbados Fertility also, I think they have a center in maybe Trinidad and Tobago. I think they have like 2 facilities. I know that there's quality care in other countries.
Right.
I think there's a lot that we kind of just get in a bubble and don't realize. But if we just looked a little bit farther outside of the walls of the United States, we might find a lot of quality
Mhm.
stuff. But I think that we're just, I guess, programmed or raised, or, it's just the way that it is, that we just think, the United States has the best of everything and everything else is subpar. And I don't believe that to be the case
It's not.
anymore.
It's not.
I mean, especially not anymore, because, and this is also just my opinion, I don't know the hardcore statistics, but in what I've seen, people who do IVF in the United States, they're closer to that 2.5 tries before it works. And when I went and had mine done, it worked the first
The
time.
first time.
It worked the first time. And I still wound up having to do it twice because my first pregnancy, while it did work, I did wind up pregnant. It was ectopic. So I had to.
Explain that ectopic.
An ectopic pregnancy is basically when you're pregnant in your fallopian tube. And if the pregnancy continues, it could rupture your fallopian tube and you will die. You could die. So when they find out you're pregnant in your tube, they have to remove the whole tube. They can't, there's no way to save it. Like you have to get it out of there, or it could be life or death.
Right.
So I was pregnant just in the wrong place. So I still had to do it twice. And the chances of you doing it twice and happening, the odds of that are just really, really, they're not good odds. And I went and did it again. And there she is right there on the picture. Like it worked again. And I feel so blessed. Like God is just, I feel like the Lord has blessed me so much.
Well, we
Yes.
feel the same way. You have been
Indeed,
blessed
indeed.
because that's what you wanted in a bad way and you got it. And
And it was a long road. It was a really
Yeah.
long road. I felt hopeless sometimes because I was like, where am I going to get this money from?
Could
And
I-
then it was,
Go on.
yeah, and it was more affordable. And I still had to save my coins.
Yeah.
I still had to, work hard and save and ask my parents to give me some money to put with it and all of that. But,
besides, Russ, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
Russ.
here's someone asking, Ray, money wise.
Mhm.
And I heard you say a few minutes ago that in the United States it's running anywhere from $25,000 to $30,000. What is really basically the money cost in Barbados?
So the procedure itself, I believe, was somewhere around $7,000
Look at the difference.
for the procedure.
Yeah.
Now you have to pay for meds, you have to
Right.
pay for, your lodging, you
Right.
have to pay for like food. So like after you do all of that twice, it cost me roughly around $20,000 to $24,000. But like
Smart.
it's night and day. I had to do it 2
Right,
times. I had to go to
right.
Barbados twice. I had to do all of these things. And it's just technically it's a fraction, when you think about the cost
Yeah.
per procedure,
Right. And that was the reason I asked you.
that included the meds and all.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
it's a lot of money.
It
Yes,
is.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, what I want to do at this time, I want to say thank you to KENDRA Riley. You have done a great job.
Thank
and
you
I'm
so much
sure-
for having me.
I'm sure there are women out there, there are families out there that can benefit from all you have said.
I hope
know.
so. That's what I hope.
I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure my co-hosts have learned a lot.
Definitely.
I want to thank my co-hosts for the great job they do week after week on the Ray Tampa podcast. We want to thank our listening audience for tuning in to the Ray Tampa podcast each and every Tuesday evening, 5:30 p.m. on 99.1 FM, The Bird. And you can also tune in to YouTube the Ray Tampa podcast on YouTube. And with all that being said, good evening.
Thank you.